Hello, good afternoon. I'm John Campbell. This is Philosophy 3, The Nature of Mind. So today, I just want to say something about what the main problems are that we'll be doing in the class, and start out with something, some administrative things. The two GSIs for the class will be Umra Sethi and Antonia Peacock over there. You want to say hi, guys? You want to say hi? Hi, Antonia. Hi, Umra. Okay, they will be running the sections that will be key to the class. This is a very interactive kind of class. You need to talk a lot, and the sections will allow you to express yourself more fully than it's always possible in a lecture. So it's very important you get enrolled in a section, and we'll finish about 20 minutes early today so that you have time to fill in the cards the GSIs will give out and find yourself a time that suits you. The two set books for the class will be David Chalmers' collection in the Philosophy of Mind and John Perry's collection called Personal Identity. The B space isn't up yet, but we should have a B space for the class up in the next 24 hours. The first reading that would be good if you can do is for Wednesday. It's Thomas Nagel's famous article, What is it like to be a bat? A mine of information about bats. So try to take a look at that. Like most of the readings in the class, this is fairly brief, but like most of the readings in the class, is fairly dense. When you read one of the short pieces that we have in the class, typically you will get to the end of it and you will feel an intense desire to sleep. You will think, I do not know what that was about. And at that point, what you have to do is have faith both in the reading, that it actually makes sense, and in yourself, that you can crack it. You have at that point to go back to the beginning and do it all again. In the readings we'll do in this class, for the most part, it would be perfectly reasonable to spend a few hours on just a few paragraphs of any one of them. And there's something kind of fractal about the subject in that usually with these readings, if you spend a lot of time just getting straight what a particular few paragraphs say, then the rest of it will become pretty easy. But it's important to be ready to take it slow, to take it carefully. Okay, so the general problem we're going to look at is the relation between mind and brain. What is the mind? If we live in a physical world, where does the mind fit in? And people often say, well, what does philosophy have to say to this anyway? I mean, surely science is what is going to crack the mind-brain problem. Surely science is what is going to tell us ultimately what the mind is. But that gets things round the wrong way. It isn't really science that is solving the mind-brain problem. It's science that creates the mind-brain problem in the first place. It is only because we have a scientific method and such a thing as objective scientific understanding of the world that we really can see clearly what the contrast is between the ways in which we understand things scientifically and the ways in which we ordinarily understand human beings. If you think about what it takes to know well another person, what most people have said is some kind of imaginative understanding is what you need to really get into the head of another person. You need to know what the world looks like from their perspective. You have to understand how it is to be in the other person's shoes, to see what their take on the world is. That's what you need to understand the mind of another person. That's what you need to understand their motivations, why they do the things they do. But that kind of imaginative understanding seems absolutely different to the kind of scientific explanation you can have of aspects of the world around you. Suppose you find yourself sharing a house from someone from some quite alien culture, some culture you've really had very little encounter with, say New Zealand or Scotland or, something kind of unimaginably alien. And you think, well, what is going on with this person? Is he happy? Is he sad? I have no idea. What is happening there? Well, if you're a whiz at science, then you could put this person into a scanner. You could break them down. You could say, look, I get it, cell by cell, what is going on with this person. I can analyze them scientifically. You might be able to predict exactly what they will do. But at the end of that, would you have any idea what was going on with that person in the way you wanted? Would you know what it was like from their point of view? Well, obviously not, if all you've done is explain them as a deterministic physical system. What you want is some kind of imaginative understanding of the other person. And that's what you're missing here. So, with that by way of, that's going to be a big issue in the whole class. That contrast between our imaginative understanding of other human beings and a scientific explanation of what they're up to. But let's look at how, historically, science generates the mind-body problem. Here's the great historian of science, Alexander Koyré, describing one particularly annoying habit of Newtonians. When Newton was big, then he obviously had lots of disciples. And one point they made was, well, science has reduced the world. Science, they think, has shown that the environment around us consists of lots and lots of atoms. Not the familiar things, but just lots of atoms, mathematically describable, governed by mathematical laws. Not only are the heavenly spaces out there empty and void, but even the so-called solid bodies, the desks, the people, the floors that we stand on, even those are full of void. The particles that compose them are by no means closely packed together, but are separated from one another by void space. The Newtonians from Bentley on took an enormous pride and pleasure in pointing out that matter proper occupies a practically infinitesimal part of space. So just think for a moment, on the basis of whatever science you have, what is science telling you about this room right now? What is here right now? Other people? Colors? Smells? Tastes? Well, what does quantum mechanics tell you is here? Quarks? Gluons? Charm? Not in any social sense. Just these lonely clumps of particles floating in the void. No other people. Physics doesn't talk about people. But physics tells you everything that is here. If physics gives you an inventory, a list of everything that there is in the universe, it doesn't leave anything out. Once you've got all the physical facts about this sector of space-time, you've got the whole thing. But ordinary stuff just isn't there. Before physics, suppose you were a medieval peasant. Suppose you're a medieval peasant looking at a flower, looking at the tremulous beauty of this thing. It's open to you then to think the color, the smell, the particular delicate wonder of this thing are actually out there in the world. You can pick up on them. Other people can pick up on that same color, on that same smell, on that same beauty that you do. So before physics, you can think that your perception just relates you to the world the way it is. You're seeing stuff. You're just seeing what's really there. The stuff is really there, and you just happen upon it. So your visual experience is just connecting you to the stuff that's out there. And it connects other people to the same world. That's what's going on right now, right? There's a moment ago I went up to the back there to look at the screen. I take it I'm getting the same thing that you're getting. I check how it's going to seem to you by seeing how it seems to me. I think that colour is out there for you to look at, for me to look at. But what physics is telling you is that's not so. What science is telling you is what's out there, what's there in the real world, is just a configuration of atoms. Wherever you think the fundamental particles and forces are, that's all that's really there. Is colour there? Class, is colour there, according to physics? No, absolutely not. The colour is just something in your mind. The colour is just something that stuff generates in your mind, and you project it onto the world. But that's a mistake. It's not really out there. You think it's out there, but it isn't. So after physics blows up the common sense picture of the world. Physics says what's going on is not at all that there are colours, smells, beauty out there for us all to pick up on. Physics says, well, what's going on is that configuration of atoms is generating a particular colour experience in me, is generating a particular colour experience in you. Might be the same experience, might be a different experience. Could you ever know? Could you know? Probably not. It cuts us off from each other. Physics divides us from each other. It says what's going on in your mind is quite different and maybe unimaginably different from what's going on in your mind. And in fact, after all, maybe what's going on in one of you, or maybe what's going on in me, is not consciousness at all. Maybe I've got all the right brain states to make me move and act more or less like a regular guy, but that's not the same as generating the consciousness. If that just got missed out in some people, you would never know. So physics is what generates these problems about the mind. Physics says, well, you can't ever know what's going on in other people's minds. You can't even know whether they have minds. Science doesn't solve the problem here. Science is what generates the problem. Science won't make it the case that there is a problem here to deal with. And if you think about it, the picture of the world that physics gives you is actually terrifying. And look, here is an artist's impression of what's in this space-time sector. What is there in the world? I mean, it's not really blue. It doesn't really have those shapes. It's unimaginably alien what's really here. None of the regular world is there. Your parents aren't there. Your pet dog isn't there. Just collections of atoms. So in that objective world, which science tells you is all there is there anything that it would be possible to care about? Gamma ray bursts, black holes. Who cares? None of that stuff has any practical significance. What science is telling you is that none of the world we care about is really there. So in that world, none of the things that are of practical interest to us actually exist in the real world, in the objective world, in the world that science describes. So, what's the right reaction there? Abject terror? Blank it out? And all that's going on is that we are projecting that stuff onto the world with our minds. It's not really there. We just project it onto the world. The colour, the smell, the beauty of the flower that you care about, that's just projected by you. But then if you think of the mind as this kind of projection apparatus, then where does the mind itself fit in to the physical world? Surely physics is telling us about the whole world. I mean, could the mind be described scientifically? Does that make sense? And if the scientific method is to say, well, I can describe everything mathematically, and I can describe everything in terms of the behavior of fundamental atoms, then the trouble is the mind doesn't really seem to fit that pattern. It doesn't seem to be mathematically describable, and it doesn't seem to be made of atoms. So how can it fit in to the scientific picture at all? If we take the scientific picture fully seriously, then it seems like at the end of the day, we have to throw out the mind itself altogether. I mean, why think there is such a thing there? Physics is telling you all that there is in the world. There isn't any room in such a picture for the mind that isn't mathematically describable and it isn't made of atoms. On that bleak note, we end the first section. Uh-huh.
When you talk about how the mind can't be described by a mathematical equation, it wasn't mind immediately like an algorithm on say YouTube predicts how
An algorithm?
yes, an algorithm that predicts what you may occur or your physical presence.
Right. You could have that. You could have a mathematical algorithm that would describe me and what I'm going to choose, say. Yeah? Is that right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I mean, how does that fit into the mind not being described by mathematics?
That's right. So, well, to take, for example, suppose I'm in a restaurant and they're offering me dim sum. I have lots of things to choose from. And there's an algorithm. You have the algorithm. You know, watch him. He's going to go for that one. Right? You don't know anything about the deeper meaning these things have for me. You don't understand how the taste of this particular dish brings back to me that autumn evening so long ago. Yeah? You get an algorithm, but you don't understand the first thing about what is going on in my mind when I reject that because it reminds me of Sally, and that always hurts. You see what I mean? Having an algorithm is not going to fill you in on what it's like from my point of view. Yeah? Sorry? I'm just missing a word. Can you say it again?
The algorithm is showing you results, but not the process.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It's a good predictive gadget, but it's not the same as knowing what's going on in here. Yep. So a way to... Anything else in that? A way to think of this is that we do take it, I mean, after all, we do take it in real life. Nobody is going to really throw out our ordinary thinking about one another's minds. But our ways of knowing about one another's minds seem to involve this kind of use of the imagination. It seems to involve getting to know someone, just involves getting some empathy for them, getting to know about them. And that's what makes it so hard to see how the mind can be physical. Because if the mind is just part of the physical... How could there be something that was just part of the physical world? Like a clock or a blackboard or whatever. Something that's just part of the physical world. But in order to know about it, you have to exercise your imagination. How could that be? How could there be something that was part of the physical world that had that characteristic? What we'll look at on Wednesday is a famous article by Thomas Nagel, where he pointed out, well, bats are really kind of weird creatures. Bats, have any of you guys ever encountered a bat at close quarters? You know, if you live in the country, you might do this. They are very, very strange, right? It is not like having a dog. No one in their senses has a bat for a pet. I was once talking about this with a student. This was a very large guy. This was a rugby player who weighed maybe 200 pounds. He told me that he lived out in the country, and one night he woke up with a bat in his room, and he didn't think about it. He didn't hesitate. He just shot out of the room and down the corridor and into a cupboard where he shut the door and stood palpitating. This is like 3 a.m. And as he stood inside the cupboard, he kind of came to his senses and said, look, it's only a tiny little bat. What's that going to do to me? And so he opened the cupboard door a crack, and the bat had got out of his bedroom and was in the corridor and making long swoops up and down, and he shut the cupboard door again and just waited for the morning. They're really strange creatures. They have a skittering, strange kind of motion. You can't figure out what they're doing, what they're up to, what they're after. Very hard to get the sense of what's going on with them. So the thing about bats is they're very intensively studied by animal scientists. Lots and lots is known about the way the brain works, about the way bat sonar works, about how bats do what they do. But can you get inside their heads? Can you form any imaginative understanding of what is going on with a bat? Well, no. I mean, there's no limit to what science can find out about the bat. But it is never going to tell you the first thing about what it's like in there. You are never going to be able to imagine the mental life of the bat. And that means that you don't know the first thing about the bat's subjective life. Now, with other people, it is good to think about extreme cases like the bat, because with other people, we take it for granted that you can kind of get the hang of what this person is up to. And the practical importance of that, having some empathetic or imaginative understanding of other people, that's very hard to exaggerate. Many people would say this is the most important single thing we have to do, is get some kind of imaginative understanding of other people. Here is Barack Obama, shortly before becoming president. It's important to see the world through the eyes of those who are different from us. The child who's hungry, the steel worker who's been laid off, the family who lost the entire life they built together when the storm came to town. When you think like this, when you choose to broaden your ambit of concern and empathize, get inside the head of the plight of others, whether they're close friends or distant strangers, it becomes harder not to act, harder not to help. The only way you know what to do with other people is that you have that imaginative understanding. The only reason you have any practical concerns at all in your life is that you have that imaginative understanding of other people. I mean, some people do dissent from this. Some distinguished people dissent from this. Here is Paul Bloom writing in the Boston Review, the current issue of the Boston Review. I used to believe this about the importance of empathy and imagination, but I am no longer sure. You'll note that's a very hedged remark, right? This is very controversial, right? What Bloom is saying is generally taken as an assault on common decency. How could that be right? Everything you care about in ordinary life, if it's more than just eating or staying alive yourself, has to do with your empathetic, your imaginative capacity to connect with other people. If you couldn't do that, you wouldn't know the first thing about them. Here's the psychiatrist, one of the founders of psychiatry, Karl Jaspers, talking about this contrast between having an imaginative understanding of someone else and being able to explain what they're doing scientifically. As someone said, you can have the algorithm. Science might be able to give you an algorithm. But look, suppose you have psychiatric patients. Suppose you consider people who are chronically depressed. Maybe they have major depression, or they're schizophrenic, or they're autistic. People who have some kind of psychiatric problem. There's such a thing as taking a scientific attitude to that person and saying, well, I can predict that what they're going to want is this, that what they're going to do is this. But this usually felt to be inhumane. When you write off someone as crazy, the reason it's offensive to describe someone as crazy is that what you are doing is you are saying, don't even bother trying to get an imaginative understanding of that person. Don't even bother trying to get inside their head and see the world from their point of view. Jasper's point in this comment was that usually what you want to do is sink yourself into the psychic situation, understand genetically by empathy how one psychic event emerges from another. If you're watching a friend of yours going through a difficult time, making a difficult decision, that is exactly what you do. You try and get how one thing from the inside emerges from the other. On the other hand, you can distance yourself and just note by repeated experience a number of phenomena are regularly linked together, and on that basis explain causally. But that scientific attitude is a quite different one to the imaginative exercise. The trouble is, this kind of imaginative understanding of other people seems to be the only way we have of knowing about the things that matter for them or matter for us. That imaginative understanding of other people, we can't do without it. It's our only access to the things that are actually important. And if you only had a scientific understanding of the world, you wouldn't know anything about the mind at all. That was the point about the bat. You can have a complete scientific understanding of how bat sonar works, how the bat sends out the pulses, what the bat has to do to monitor the pulses, how bats avoid jamming each other. You can do such a lot of that stuff, but you still don't know anything about the mental life of the bat. So that's the basic problem. And that is not just a local problem to this class. I actually think if you think about our broader culture generally, that is the deep running problem that is being addressed a lot of the time. I mean, that we are in the middle of a lot of the time. It's not being successfully addressed. There's just one last comment I want to make before we go to the GSIs and sections, which is people very often react to this kind of point. People very often react to this kind of point by saying, well, that means that the physical world can't be the whole story. That means that there must be something more. There must be some kind of stuff that's not physical stuff. There must be a soul. There must be something made of ectoplasm or something. That is completely unhelpful, that reaction. It makes no progress with the basic question. The reason it doesn't is, suppose you take it seriously, what that view is dualism. Dualism, from the Latin due, what is it from? Meaning two kinds of stuff, right? It means you've got two kinds of stuff. You've got mental stuff and you've got physical stuff. So physics is incomplete. Physics tells you about the stuff that's made of atoms, but there's another kind of stuff that's not made of atoms. That's what dualism says. Right? So you've got physical stuff and you've got some other kind of stuff, ectoplasm, that's made of something different. Now, the truth is, if that turned out to be right, then physicists would be delighted. Physicists would say, that's fantastic. Let's look at the characteristics of ectoplasm. Yeah? I mean, it would be like dark energy or dark matter or something. They would say, that's great, right? Let's figure out what this stuff is and how it works. That would be just more grist to the scientific mill if there was another kind of stuff than matter. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever read, have any of you ever read The Amber Spyglass, Philip Pullman? No? Okay, very good one. Okay, they're aimed at 12-year-olds. I am a big fan. They're just wonderful. Is there any good? Yes? Right. But anyway, the thing about the amber spyglass is that this is kind of a spoiler, but it's not much of a spoiler. In the amber spyglass, it turns out that there is a kind of stuff that's responsible for consciousness, a kind of golden dust, and you can see it through the amber spyglass. And maybe that stuff is not governed by regular physical laws. Maybe there is a kind of, and who knows, that might be true. Maybe there is a kind of golden dust. But the trouble is, suppose there is a kind of golden dust that's not the regular atomic stuff, then the question is still, how does that work? How does that generate consciousness? How could you have an imaginative understanding of the golden dust when you couldn't have an imaginative understanding of something only in terms of atoms? I mean, it's just as puzzling. You've got exactly the same problems when you talk about golden dust or ectoplasm or whatever it is as you had when you talked about physics. Only it's a lot more obscure, because the truth is you have no idea what you're talking about when you talk about ectoplasm or souls or golden dust or whatever it is. You don't make any progress by talking about two kinds of stuff or saying there's a kind of stuff that's not physical stuff. We have to stick with the brain. There it is. The neurophysiologist Susan Greenfield, who spent her life studying how the brain works, said that what got her into studying the brain was that somehow when you look at that kind of squidgy mass, 3 pounds in weight or so, when you look at that, it's all there. And what she meant was your world, your subjective world, all the colours, lights, tastes, people's memories, plans, dreams, is somehow all there. And how can that be? That is the basic puzzle. And it doesn't help to say, well, it's actually not a real, it's not a brain like that. It's made of golden dust or it's made of ectoplasm. That just substitutes a bunch of stuff you don't really know what sense it makes, and gives you a problem that anyway, if you did make sense of it, would be just as hard. Whatever we're made of is some kind of stuff. And the question is, how can that be sustaining a mind? And here's just an analogy you might think of. Suppose you get some, this is just saying what's wrong with saying there's more to the world than the physical world. What makes the problem so difficult is that there is only the physical world. But somehow the mind is there. How can that be? And if you say, well, there's two kinds of stuff, well, suppose you had some intelligent Martians who landed on Earth and they find TVs. You guys still have television sets, right? That's I never know. Is that okay? You know what it is anyway. Right, okay. So they're looking at TVs and they're thinking, boy, Martian physics tells us a lot about how this works, but what we don't understand is how you're getting those colours on the screen. And maybe they have lots of puzzles. Maybe they have competitions where people try to solve this. Martians try to solve this. And then someone says, I've got it. I know how those coloured images are getting up on the screen. They say, there are actually two kinds of stuff. There's the ordinary physical electrical stuff, but there is also a special TV stuff. And TV stuff just automatically generates coloured images. That's the answer. That's why it seems so hard. We were trying to address this in terms of ordinary electricity and physics. But of course, once you realize that now, of course, that is not a good answer. You might get a career out of that kind of answer. You might be able to write a popular books among the Martian population based on that kind of idea. But it is obviously not a good answer because you haven't explained anything at all. You've got the same problems you had before. I mean, what is TV stuff? How does that work? And you still have no idea how to answer them. All you've done is make the problem more obscure. You've only postponed the problems. What is this stuff? How is it making these things? And how is it related to physical stuff? So postulating a separate kind of TV stuff wouldn't help. And similarly, postulating a separate kind of mental stuff doesn't help. We have to there is a real hard problem here. How is the mental life, that is the most important single thing for any of us, how is that connected to the physical world that is all that is there? We've got to work with the physical world that is really there and explain how that connects to the mind. Okay, so Wednesday, try and read Thomas Nagel's What It's Like to Be a Bat. After that, but don't go away, not so fast. Don't start shuffling papers. In a second, the GSIs will just take over, and you really must get into a section if you possibly can. Okay, I hope I've left enough time for that. And incidentally, I know we're kind of packed today, but that will not last. There will be plenty of spaces before long, I promise you. Okay.